Hey everyone, I don't know about you, but I'm ready for some coffee. My favorite spot, because of the people, because of the coffee beans, all the good stuff, is Cafe 211 in Bentonville. If you're not in the Northwest Arkansas area, though, Cafe 211 also offers their beans and their coffee mugs deliverable, I think, nationwide. So you can create that whole experience from your home. Mauricio Guerrero is the founder of Cafe 211. He is from Guatemala and his coffee is from Guatemala as well. There's a beautiful story that's tied to it. I encourage you to check out the Cafe 211 website, check out Mauricio's story, the story of the coffee and the people who make it, and go ahead and buy some and we can sip it together during our next conversation. And you can use the discount code Cara Elvira 10 to get a 10% discount on your order. Good afternoon, Melissa. How are you doing today?
Good. How about yourself?
I'm doing well, thank you. I wish I was in New York and we could do this in person, but my mom, who lives in New York, is visiting me this week. So I have a little bit of New York in my corner of the world.
Well, you'll be able to hear it outside of my window here in a second. The
Thank
subway will
goodness.
come by.
Honestly, it's been too quiet here for me to get a good sleep lately, so I'm gonna have to record, just those background noises and play
You'll
that
get
sound back. So you're in New York City right now. Which borough are you in?
Brooklyn.
Woo, Brooklyn represent. Is that your favorite borough or is it just your current one? What neighborhood are you in?
I am an outer borough person. I when I first moved here, I moved to Queens, which I loved because it's considered the international borough, and like it totally is. It's like every kind of food, every kind of culture, all represented in every neighborhood, really. But I like Brooklyn for the green spaces that they have that over Queens, at least that's how I feel about it. Sorry, Queens. I live right near Prospect Park, so I go there quite a bit.
Oh, what a dream. I remember the first time we spoke and you had that beautiful backdrop going. That is a special place and just, yeah, so cool. Brooklyn and Queens both hold their own. But without further ado, I want to introduce you specifically. This is Melissa Walker. You are the collections manager at Poster House, which is a museum in New York City, and seems like one of the coolest jobs one could have. So I am super excited to know your story and how you got there. And let's start maybe with, what's your background? Did you grow up obsessed with posters? Where did art fit into your life? How did this all come to be?
Yeah, I don't know. I had a healthy love of music when I was a kid, and I read every book in the library about the Beatles. And through that, I discovered Yoko Ono, and through that, I discovered contemporary art. So my love of contemporary art really started through music, I think. And when I was a kid, my dad's job up until 2008, he did it for 38 years. He printed the newspaper, one of the local newspapers, the Tampa Tribune. So I was always aware of like mechanical reproduction in terms of like printmaking. I had visited the press room many times as a kid and a young adult and had seen the massive printing presses that print newspapers. So I was always kind of interested in that idea of like, wow, that's really cool. And if you look at a lot of contemporary art, many times you see there are like collage artists or people who incorporate newspaper or like, sort of use different photo mechanical reproductions or prints in their work. And so I just always kind of linked the two in my head that like, graphic design and contemporary art kind of can have this wonderful like sort of marriage in their mind. And so when it came time for me to go to college, I of course studied art. I don't think there was anything else I could do. And I studied painting and printmaking. I studied a lot about how to make prints. And one of my favorite things to do as a printmaker is to make lino cuts or relief cuts, which are generally like you take a block of wood or a piece of linoleum, which is an easily carved piece of sort of rubber, and you kind of just make a plate out of it. So you could put an image onto it and you roll ink and put it through the press and blammo, you got yourself a print. So, I started doing the things I saw at the press room in a small way. And so, of course, I loved it. I thought it was interesting. It's really like printmaking has this double aspect to it that I like, where there's a lot of planning to it. And then there's the execution, which is the more artistic part of it. A lot of printmakers make editions, which means they make like 10 prints all exactly the same. That was never the kind of printmaker I was. Like if I made 10 prints, none of them matched color, like scope, like any of it. It would just be like, I think that was the worst and best part. My professors at school would be like, none of these, like you have to do an addition. You have to make them all the same. Like that's the exercise. And I'd be like, nah, that's not interesting. And so that's the kind of painter side of me, where it's like this person who just wants to execute like a singular idea, which a painting is only one thing, right? Like, you can do a series of paintings that are related, but not always the same. But printmaking is about having that same print like over and over, like a newspaper. Like you want 10,000 copies of the same newspaper. Everybody needs to get the same information, right? So that's kind of where I like came from in terms of like artistic background, I guess. I came from a real blue collar family. So like, my education was always through like state schools and scholarships and like earning my way through and stuff like that. So there was that kind of still kind of blue collar-y aspect that, my father's career had too, of somebody who's like, I make stuff for a living.
That's so cool though. I mean, like an artist, I mean, all you do is make stuff. And so to have that mentality, I'm sure like really made a positive impact possibly. And it's so special the way your dad's blue collar work informed like this interest in printmaking and its intersection in like a new way to apply it in your life. So I think that's really cool, generation to generation. And then I'm interested in what you said about, printmaking, there being some interest from your teachers at least in creating these editions and what the process, like you said, there's like planning and execution. I'm like a project management operations kind of background. So I'd love to talk like timeline for a little bit. Like what is a project like for a printmaker, especially if you're taking an approach where you're not making the same thing multiple times?
Well, traditionally, so like back in the day, like when printmaking now is you send it to Kinko's, right? And then you pick it up like 10 minutes in 10 minutes. Printmaking used to be a workshop like mentality. So in terms of planning, so now we don't have the workshops, but we have artists who want to make an edition. So you kind of have to think division of labor whenever you're thinking about making a print. So that is, what is the scale of it? How big is it? All right, I have to buy the paper that's going to be this big. Then I have to make sure every piece of paper is the same size and has like little registration holes on the side of it. Okay, well, how many colors is it going to be? 4. Great. Are they colors I can get out of a jar? No, I have to mix them. Okay, so I need 25 prints at the end of this, which means I have to print 35 to get 25. So I need to mix enough colors to get 35 prints so I can addition 25 out of it. So there's a lot of like, you have to begin with the end in mind. Like, and this kind of actually used to map onto basically posters in a sense, because it's the same idea. How big is it? How many colors are it? Like, is it a full bleed print? Like, how many do you want in the end? Because you do have to make overrun to make that match. You have to do it, because in the printmaking process, sometimes things don't go your way and you lose a couple. And in a commercial printing process, you can lose 5,000 in the blink of an eye, like, because your press is going like that. But in a smaller workshop, you might lose 2, which is still heartbreaking, because 2, let's say you're on your 3rd color and something totally goes wrong and you lose 2, that translates to like 1 day of work. Like, because it's like you've done all this prep and the thing. So additioning is kind of a bummer like that. depending on the size and the scope of the project, the amount of colors, like you really have to take into account all of these different, like you could have a mistake, or, you know, it could be misregistered, or the paper is weird that day and it doesn't pick up all the color, so you lose one. So it can be a real heartbreaker. And when I was a teacher, I taught printmaking at a college level. That was the thing I would always emphasize to like my students, was like, okay, so you're going to come into the print lab and you're going to say, I've got 3 hours. How much work do you think you can get done in 3 hours? And someone would say, well, I bet I could get two colors done on 10 prints. And I'm like, no, you're not going to get that done. So it's like, it's this idea of like, you know, it's kind of like a marathon and not a sprint. Like if I wanted to execute a painting in an afternoon, I probably could, you know, but a print is a little bit more involved. So
That's so helpful, that insight. So thank you. I think what's really cool with that is like the foresight that it takes to be creative in printmaking. Like you can't just be on a whim throwing things at the press. Like it seems like there's a lot involved. And I think in my own life too, like I need to like make space for creativity. Like I need to like be intentional, and that intentionality I'm feeling in how you're describing this printmaking experience. So that's a great takeaway for anyone. So the other side of your background is in the gallery world, right? I'd love to understand a bit of like, the business side of art that you experience and how that kind of gets us to present day with Poster House.
Sure, totally. When I first moved to New York, I knew I wanted gallery experience because I was studying fine art, contemporary art, however you want to call it. But I knew I needed this idea of like, okay, the end game of making art is to sell it. This is what everyone wants. So I was like, I should work at the store that sells the art to understand how that works. What do they do? How do they market it? How do they mount the show? What's required of the gallery, the artist, like all these different things. And so lucky for me, there's about 1 million unpaid internships at galleries in New York City. And I was able to get one at a contemporary gallery. And because I was so interested and motivated, like when I was there, I would assist in sales, and I just would make myself available to learn about all these other things, like not your typical intern who's just there for like credit. No insult to interns. I know you work hard and you do not get paid. At Poster House, we actually pay our interns, but that's for later. So anyhow, I just made myself like super interested and available. Like, hey, do you want to update the website? Yes, I do. Do you want to learn the registration program? Yes, I do. Do you want to go to the artist studio and pick up the stuff? Of course I do. Like all of it, like, from soup to nuts. And it was really informative because it lets you know that it's really a job. Like a lot of people don't really sort of consider that a monetary or a money-making scheme. Like if your child says, I want to be an artist, you're like, oh, sweetheart, no, like, please, we want you to earn a living. It really is a living, and you can do it. And there's a lot of infrastructure out there that supports it, not only galleries, but patrons, like all sorts of stuff. And now, with the internet, you can sort of like directly market yourself to people as well. So I worked at a contemporary gallery while I was in grad school, and then that led to me just having a love of working in galleries. And so I ended up working at a vintage poster gallery called Chisholm Gallery. And I was like, what's the difference? They're still selling art, at least in my view. But I knew nothing about the vintage poster world. And through my I was a hired hand there. I actually collected a paycheck. And I loved it. I loved selling things to people. I loved, because I always presented it as an opportunity to be a custodian of a piece of art instead of, I'm going to own this. It's like, no, you're going to take care of it. Like, this is what you're charged with. And so the dealer, Gail Chisholm, she had been in the business for almost 40 years. So she basically told me the ins and taught me the ins and outs of where the heck vintage posters come from, why the heck people collect them, and basically like sort of the general categories of posters. So at their core, posters are advertising. So anything in the world that you can sell, you can make a poster for, right? So we had entertainment, which is like, you know, anything from opera to rock concerts, food and wine, self-explanatory. Travel, totally self-explanatory. Trains, planes, and automobiles. That's what I used to call it. And let's see, there was always sort of brackish water, sort of like exhibition posters, different things like that, like sort of other, as we like to call it.
Etc. Kala.
Other. But anything that's a product. So televisions, you know, whatever. Oh, and movie posters, of course, that you know, that falls under entertainment. And so, you know, through really gaining firsthand experience and handling these posters, adjudicating condition, becoming knowledgeable about how to take care of them, how to frame them, all of these kinds of things. Like I sort of, you know, gained, I put my printmaking knowledge together with this sort of poster knowledge, and then I became this magical being. I don't know.
Unicorn of poster art collaboration, intersection, all the good things. So I think it's really wonderful how there's this gallery that was dedicated to antique posters. And you mentioned that your mentor taught you about where they came from and why. And I want to ask you where they came from and why.
Yeah, this is really fascinating. So, you know, generally, and this is a little bit of Poster House, a little bit of Gail. So Gail Chisholm sort of, her poster specialty was Leonardo Cappiello, who's one of the big names in posters. She did a lot of French posters. She did mostly, she specialized in 1920 to about 1960. For Poster House, we believe that Poster House believes that posters start in like 1860. And we do have posters from as early as that. And when we think about the history of technology, printmaking specifically, you have to look to the sort of areas of commerce in the world. So 1860 in the United States, we weren't super into printmaking. Like we had prints and the ability to make prints, but posters weren't very strong in the early days. They were mostly called broadsides, which are just big old newspapers you would put on the side of buildings that had information on them. But over in Europe, they had a lot more time and experience with printmaking. So stone lithography, as it was in the early days, was the commercial style of printing. Now, this took an entire workshop of probably 20 people to do. And stone lithography was actually done on stones. And so this, you know, when you look to the history of vintage posters, you find a lot of French ones. You find a lot of sort of Swiss ones from the, well, those are a little bit later in the 50s, but France was a big place for, it was a print center. People would go there to get prints made. And at that time, you know, advertising were prints and posters. So we see a lot of posters sort of flow out of there. It becomes a center for people to come and be successful. It's sort of like New York in the Mad Men era. If you wanted to be in advertising, where in the heck did you go? You went to New York and you tried to be a copywriter or an illustrator or whatever and get your work made. So it was kind of like that in the early days. So a lot of vintage posters, I know a lot of people would come in the gallery and be like, are all of your posters French? And it would be like, well, it seems like it, but it's not true. You know, like there are other posters in the world, but some of the better ones, and that's true about any art, you know, field, is like beautiful things live longest. Super sorry. So like the more popular posters, the more beautiful pieces sort of have a longer life because people want to collect them. They want to put them on their wall. They want to look at them. So, you know, you're not going to see the ugly. But at Poster House, we, not that we collect ugly, but we collect broadly. So we don't collect the more well-known sort of blue chip people. We collect, you know, as in a wider scope. So I don't know if that answered where they come from, but that's like kind of where they come from.
I had no idea about France's origins as like the advertising like empire.
Well, they were definitely a print center. There were other, I mean, like other things disrupted. Of course, there were two world wars that happened in Europe. I don't know if you've heard of them, but like other places were centers of print too. But France is like somehow survived a lot longer. So like you don't see a lot of Italian classic posters from like 1920, 30, or 40 because of that Second World War. Same for Germany, you know, these sorts of things. Like a lot for the UK as well. Like, you know, they just didn't survive as great.
Yeah. So I like know nothing in the space of posters other than what you're teaching me, except for one fact that comes from France that I'm so excited about. So like the Morris columns, I learned about these recently, where this man, I guess, designed these, they're like very wide pillars that would go in the streets of France. And that's what you'd put all the posters on because inside of it, the street sweepers hid their like brooms. And I just like, I was at
Oh,
I thought that was so interesting how it became a part of the culture. It became a form of disguise for other things that had to navigate the same space. Um,
that's so interesting. Yeah, because people often, that's a big question for people. They're like, well, where are posters? And I'm like, well, where are posters in your life now? Like, you know, if you live in New York, of course, they're on the subway. But in Europe, where there's a lot more pedestrian malls, there are those, we call them like poster hoardings, like, you know, the columns that they put the things on or on the side of buildings, you know, exactly where construction is, they put them up. Same here in New York. Posters are everywhere. Just open your eyes.
yes. And I kind of like the reason I know about these columns is because they were in this painting that I saw at Sotheby's. And I think it's cool that like just posters are embedding the art like in the fine art. And like it brings me to, you know, when we first spoke, you said this thing to me that really resonated, which was about poster collecting as a democratic sport. And when you think
Oh,
about like fine art versus poster art, I'd love for you to speak a little bit to like what
sure.
that means.
Everybody has a poster. Look under your bed. You probably have one right now. And that's what's really great about collecting posters too, is that generally speaking, the financial barrier for entry to poster collecting is like nothing. It can be $0 to $20 to start, you know, and people, you know, I would just recommend you collect along your what you like, you know, and that's easy. All you have to do is ask yourself, well, what is it that I enjoy? Movie posters? Well, good for you, because movie posters are very cheap. And most posters are like, some of the more expensive things within the poster world are, you know, the most expensive poster, and has been for quite some time, is a movie poster for Metropolis, and it was like 3 million at auction. So that is the most expensive thing. We know that the contemporary art world goes triple that, quadruple that, like a million times over $3 million. Like, forget it. Like, you know, so the idea that anybody can collect posters is very true. You can get one sometimes for just showing up at a concert. They'll just give you one. So that's what's really nice about having posters or thinking about them, is that they're really, they're, culturally too, people can just start to relate to them. So like if you see a movie poster for a movie you love, you're like, ah, yeah, I remember that movie. That's great. Wow, this is a cool poster. I never thought about the poster before. Or if you're like, oh, I love that cheese. I can't believe there's a poster for that cheese. Or like whatever. Like, you know, there's just 1,000 different sort of ways to relate to it. Like it could be a protest poster for something you absolutely, you know, totally believe in, or it could be a product that you've been obsessed with your whole life, or it could simply just be, you know, a poster for a musical artist who you want to put on your wall. The
Yeah.
end, you know?
Oh my gosh, so many good points there and ideas. I feel like I should be the cheese poster collecting person. I think that's my new niche. I love that. Um, Thank you. But then I think something else that you said that was really important was like, you know, collecting posters from protests. And I think, you know, in the current moment that's now lasted almost 2 years, like, we're going to see a lot of important like art and ways that people are like just like commemorating what we're all feeling and that heaviness. And you spoke a little bit earlier about the broad collection approach that's taken by Poster House. And I wondered what informs that decision making. Like, right, is it to be sure that there's a diversity of poster makers or a diversity of historical moments or color schemes? Like, what are you thinking about in that? And we can start like transitioning to just talking about Poster House at large.
Yeah, absolutely. So like Poster House's collection policy, we collect, one of the things we like to say first is we collect with the intent to exhibit. So we're not just willy-nilly just adding things to our collection just because we think they're cool. We're thinking of shaping a collection that we can draw from in the future. So we have a couple of concepts, loose concepts in our mind when the curator or myself or other people, even the director, look towards, oh, what should we add to the collection? So we know our schedule for 5 years out. So if we see a poster that kind of fits that description, we're going to snap it up, you know. So there's that aspect of it. So we look at what we're trying to, like shows we're trying to build and where we can find those things. Another is we have a concept called the living archive. So remember I told you France was a big center for print? Well, it was also a big center for people to collect. There were early collectors of posters at that particular time too. So they would sometimes go up to the bill poster, the person who was literally putting the poster on the side of a wall, and be like, yo, can I have one of those posters? And they'd be like, sure. And a collector is born. So, and there was early poster dealers. Even in the 1890s, people were already dealing in posters. They were contemporary posters, but they were being sold as art. So even like Mucha, who's very famous, poster maker, one of the fathers of posters, his work was sold for decorative purposes early on. So there was this idea of an early concept of a collector's sort of atmosphere. So our living archive is kind of that for now. So what we do is we solicit ad agencies. I write them up and say, hey, we saw your poster that you made for, I don't know, the ACLU. We really think it's great. Would you mind donating that to us? Most times they say yes. And we do that with a global reach. So I get posters from Africa. I get posters from, South America. I get posters I try to get them from Asia. Sometimes we run into like language barriers there because I'm directly contacting the people who made it or the ad agencies. And, so we get a lot of posters that way too. Now, we're not going to exhibit these posters in the next 5 years, but we're thinking with the idea of, wouldn't it be great to become the sort of source for things where we could curate a really interesting show about contemporary advertising from 2018 or 2019, because we have this growing collection of what is contemporary, but in 20 years time, it's not contemporary, it's vintage. So, so there's this, that's one of the things that we're trying to do as well, to have excellent examples of design. Sometimes they're not excellent. We are collecting them because they're weird or controversial, or like, I don't know if you saw, but like Burger King did this really crazy thing for International Women's Day, where they had a poster that said women should be in the kitchen. But it was an initiative to, make chefs of women, like to make women chefs, like head chefs. But it was just really wrongheaded. I tried really hard to get that one. Couldn't get it. Anyway.
So they're like, we want to erase this from people's memories. We're not putting it much.
But we want things like that. That's what we think is interesting, because it's a snapshot of culture, like whatever it is, good, bad, or ugly, as I call it. So that's the living archive. We do get a lot of donations. And so we have a committee that adjudicates the donations. Sometimes we will get an incredible offer from a collector who's, getting rid of, for whatever reason, whatever they want, they need more space. They want to collect more things. They will offer us really incredible collections. And, we have to adjudicate a couple of things, like, will we be able to store it and care for it? Because that is a huge part of having objects. And the other is, can we use it in some way? Like, can we use it in the next 5 years to exhibit, or could we loan it to someone? So there's a lot of, ways in which we collect. And so whenever we get offered donations, sometimes they're like out of left field, and we'll just be like, you know what, this is an incredible opportunity for us to grow our collection. It's not something we would buy, but it's interesting, so that aspect happens as well. So that's kind of how we approach collecting.
Oh my gosh, I love there's so many layers to it and so many different just like fields of consideration and stakeholders. But I think that's a kind of like hyperbolic like application of the foresight you have in printmaking. And now like as the collections manager of prints, you really need to know ahead of time what you're doing, like even 20 years out to get that living archive going. I think that's really, really powerful and great to see it implemented. But you also talked about, like that Burger King example and some posters that are just like out of left field. And so like to just like abstract again a little bit, like do you think there's a different responsibility for a poster maker than an artist? Like because it's like a public facing thing, because it's communicating information, like do they need to be thinking about accessibility in terms of like the different, like even the font that's using, like some of the 70s, like colorful stuff was like not even readable. Like how much do you think that responsibility has to come into play like uniquely for posters?
It's an interesting question because I think advertising always has to compete for your attention. So sometimes it's just a matter of just like screaming out from the wall, like, and sometimes it's about being offensive or the loudest thing, on the wall, as I say. So it's hard to know. I think design is very sophisticated, but it's also cyclical. Like you'll see a lot of the same kind of like things come and go, like, illustration as the main central theme of posters and advertising has kind of come back again as opposed to photo-based stuff. So even when you're scrolling through Instagram, you'll see a lot more illustration like in there, like a big colorful background with like a drawing, and then it'll say like, I don't know, cup, which is like the new bra ad, which I always get all the time on my Instagram, like whatever. So, and you'll just see illustrations and stuff like that. So I think design does whatever design does. I don't know. I think the responsibility utterly with people who design posters is to their client, and their client is the person who decides. So like Burger King okayed that. Like, they were totally cool with that. They're like, yes, this is a great idea. Let's go with that. And they were willing to risk it and to sort of do this weird out of left field kind of thing. Unfortunately, it backfired, and we still see people mess up in this way, or mess up in the culture. Like, to them, they thought they were doing something great. So I think it's probably like the client and like however they're going, like however their campaign needs to be, and too, like the more people involved in a design, sometimes the worse it can get. Design by committee, like these kinds of ideas. So I don't know. I don't envy people who have to design the posters. I'm glad to just collect them and just sort of adjudicate them on the aesthetic value of my own personal metric. Like,
I think that's a great place to be in. Yes, for sure. And so I'd love to dive more into like what your role means like as a collections manager at Poster House, and what your responsibility is to like, I guess, your client, which is the public.
Yes. So as I say, like I take care of all the posters. I know where they all are, which is a burden. I catalog them. I like for the new show that we're mounting right now for Pushpin. It's the next show that's coming up after Klinger and Freak Power. So one of my jobs was to look at the collection of posters that were going to be in the show and adjudicate which ones needed to be conserved. And so take those posters and we don't do any conservation in-house. We just don't have the resources to do so. So I send them to our paper conservator. They do something that's called linen backing. And sometimes they touch up the color, with watercolor. Everything is reversible. And so I adjudicate conditions, send them to the conservator, get them back, get them to the framer, give the framer the specs, and then have them delivered back to the museum. So that's one aspect. That's the sort of exhibition side of it. The collections, we have a huge responsibility to digitize our collection. So I have to oversee the photo shoots that we do at least once a month to continually digitize our collection. When I catalog them, of course, I upload these photos to our database, which eventually we're redesigning our website this year, and I don't know when it will launch, but we're hoping that in conjunction with the launch of the new website that we will have an online searchable database of our collection. 6,000 of which I've cataloged. We have over 10. It's something you have to just get right and be like, listen, I'm not going to catalog all these posters in my tenure. It cannot be done. One person cannot do it. One person cannot do it. So I just chip away at it when I can. And then another aspect I consider very personally, and it's usually not part of a collections manager job. Sometimes it is outreach. So I do lectures, I curate for the museum, which is something that's a lot of collection managers don't do. I look at curatorial texts, like I look at them and, add my 2 cents to it. So I edit other people's work sometimes. And I don't know, that's kind of it. Yeah, that's almost all of it.
Everything. Not a lot, but a lot. So most immediately, you mentioned curatorial texts. What is that?
So every show has to have words associated with it. We just don't put things on the wall.
Those words too.
Yes, we like to, over time, we've created an institutional voice. Most museums, have a voice like this. So that basically means like when you go to MoMA and you're looking at an exhibition of work, it has a point of view. It has something it's trying to teach you. And since a lot of people don't know about posters, Poster House's view is to teach you everything about posters that you need to know, whatever that may be. So, for the Pushpin show, this is about a design agency that was created in the late 1950s by Milton Glaser and Seymour Quast. So a lot of people are familiar with Milton Glaser, not so much with Seymour, but there were also tons of other designers and illustrators who worked within that. So our job is to teach you with this show called The Pushpin Legacy, who those folks were, what kind of work they did, and why it was relevant and groundbreaking for that particular period of time. And one reason illustration is on my mind is because Pushpin was very much based in the illustration world. So if you came to them with an advertising need, they would deliver unto you a finished product of illustration and typography together with copy. They did everything. So, and they did it almost all with illustration. So it's like, that's the thrust of the show. That's what we're trying to teach you. And then also dazzle you with all of the things that are on the wall. And so there's a bunch of information on the wall that you can access and read more. So whenever somebody who's ever curating, it's a process to get that curatorial text together. So it sometimes, requires not only more hands on it, but like, of course, someone to edit it for grammar and like all of that. So you're just doing a lot of work with that.
In the exhibits that you guys are producing, just the titles are so great, the content is so interesting, but I'm curious about how that comes to fruition. Like, is that a committee kind of model? Like, are you coming up with an idea and pitching it to people internally, or how does an exhibit become an exhibit?
Well, that's a good question. We used to have an open, so anybody could pitch us an exhibition, anybody off the street, like you could. But there were a couple of things you had to do. You had to have access to the collection you were trying to exhibit, because it was like, listen, that's a great idea, but where are the posters? So that was like a major, like, sort of hurdle for a lot of curators. So we heard a lot of ideas through that open call. Our chief curator, Angelina Lippert, comes up with a lot of these concepts too. And sometimes it's about the availability of different types of shows. So we have this show up right now, Julius Klinger. He was a poster artist in Austria during the 19 teens and 20s. And it's a sort of major look at his work in that particular period of time. And that exhibition came to us from the Wolfsonian. So that is an institution down in Miami, and it actually traveled there. So we wanted to show someone of his ilk, like Klinger. We wanted to show someone from that time period and from that area, and this show fit our exhibition's schedule. And so unfortunately, due to COVID, we had to push it back for a while, but luckily everybody was kind of in the same boat, so they were able to accommodate us, and we were able to go on with the exhibition. Same with Freak Power. This Freak Power is the exhibition up right now about Hunter S. Thompson's run for sheriff in Aspen in 1970. And that came to us from Fat City Gallery in Aspen. It's a huge curated show of these posters, and we were able to work with their in-house curator to make it fit for Poster House. So, in that way, we were able to look at the text and sort of make it fit, on our walls, sort of give you the highlights of everything. And our in-house designer was able to, create this wonderful designed thing to present all these posters in. So that's just two examples, but as I say, Angelina comes up with ideas, and then we go out and seek, the collections and see if we can find a curator appropriate. If she doesn't have time, you're always looking for that next exhibition. And as I say, we try to plan them 5 years in advance.
Oh my God.
Sometimes it works.
No, those are wonderful examples. Thank you. And what I love, I'm so excited for the revamped website, but with the current one too, I love that you can get glimpses at what the exhibits are about. And also, I think you can schedule virtual tours with the museum, which is very special. And so earlier you mentioned this responsibility to digitize, to be able to see the works online. I'd love to know where that responsibility comes from. But on the flip side of that too, this is the first poster museum in the United States, right? And so I think that the work you're doing with, these webinars and virtual experiences kind of speaks to how you need to market that or advertise and get the word out. And so I'd love to understand what the digital space means, on both those sides.
For digitizing the work, I think, we want to be the museum people come to when they're looking for a poster. We want them to be able to come to us and be like, hey, we're looking for work that is from the 1920s and is made by blah, blah, blah. And we can be like, ta-da, or at least point to it, or just be a major source of research and development for the sort of academic research for posters, to sort of go forward with that. And then on the flip side too, if we digitize our collection, then we can monetize our collection, because depending on copyright, we can actually sell these high-res images to someone who's writing a book and needs it for their, for the illustration or, whatever. So if we have excellent, beautiful digital examples, I think that's a hidden thing museums don't like to talk about, but a lot of times that's why they digitize their collections. But we do it, also to, and what's close to my heart is when I digitize, I like a warts and all approach. If it comes to us in terrible condition, I would like it, recorded that it is in terrible condition, and that, if I eventually get it conserved, then I have it rephotographed and now it's in better condition, So that's kind of the story I like to tell with the digitization. And then, for the virtual tours, that was just something that we felt really we needed to pivot on, especially in 2020. It was one of those things where we had these great, beautiful exhibitions up and nobody could see them for a while, right? And so that became and our education team has booked virtual tours with, different educational places, not necessarily public schools, but other colleges and universities and stuff. And so we've been able to continue to show the exhibitions, even though there's limited amount of time to see them. We are actually open. We have timed tickets. and sort of, to that end, reduced amount of people who can come through. But, and then also some people aren't comfortable doing in-person tours in a group. It's, hey, it's your comfortability level. And the virtual space has actually opened it up. So we get to have a tour with someone in California. We get to have a tour with someone in the UK. Our virtual programs attract people from around the world. I've gotten emails from someone after I've done a lecture and they're like, yeah, that was super great. I'm over in the UK and I fully appreciated you talking about, the UK's involvement in blah, blah, blah. And I was like, wow, totally. Wow, cool. So it's been a really great pivot, for a lot of the exhibitions.
So cool. And I mentioned this to you before, like I have spent this, the pandemic in Arkansas and I missed the museums that I grew up with. And so I've so enjoyed these virtual experiences. I think they make a big difference for a lot of people when we were grasping for community, in whatever way that we could find it.
Totally.
And now we get to see a little sneak peek, right, of the space of the poster house, and have our own little virtual.
Yeah, absolutely. I will share my screen here and present this to you. Awesome. Yeah. So, alrighty, there it is. That's our logo, Poster House. This is our cafe space. We are going to be open for indoor dining in a couple of weeks. So, hooray for progress. But the posters you see on the walls are actually from our permanent collection. We have a smattering of different pieces, from one for instant iced coffee to a modern one for cheese. There's actually a push pin all the way over on the left. There's a butcher. That's a push pin poster by Seymour Quast. And this is looking from the our museum is on 23rd Street in New York. So this is looking towards 23rd Street. And this is our billboard vitrine with the big Carter billboard in it. So as often as we can, we choose different billboards to put on display, because billboards are posters too. And unfortunately, they're gigantic posters and they're kind of a pain in the butt to install. But this one is for a magician, Carter the Great. It's from the early 1920s and it's an American billboard. It's an 8-sheet billboard. And yes, there are 8 individual sheets that have been woven together on a backing. So there you are. This is a little bit of our 24th Street timeline, as we call it. So there are sort of a timeline of posters from left to right that show you the different techniques. That is from stone lithography to commercial printing, which is offset lithography. Styles, everything from Art Deco all the way down to psychedelic, you can see that's right in front of you. So we like to show off the different styles and types of printmaking, the types of artistic points of view, Art Deco versus psychedelic. Here's a different view of that. And you can see there's a poster down there for the Public Theater, which is like a more modern take on poster making and how information comes out at you. So this is back in time to one of our exhibitions we had, Baptized by Beefcake, the golden age of hand-painted movie posters in Ghana. So in the 1980s and 90s, there were these posters that were hand-painted by Ghanaian artists that basically copied the cover of VHS cassettes. And these are the de facto movie posters for these movies. They would then take the poster, the VHS cassette, a VCR, a TV, and a generator, and hit the road with a mobile sort of movie theater. And to advertise the posters or advertise the movies, they would put these posters up and attract a crowd. So we knew one of the collectors who had a big cache of these from that particular time period. And that is what is on display. Terminator 2, Children of the Corn, Supergirl, all of these things, but they're all hand painted. And yeah, we consider them posters. You can tell on the kickboxer one in the middle that the upper left and right corner are completely worn away. It's because they used to nail it to something and then rip it down at the end of the show. So over time, the corners got worn away. So you'll see a lot of the posters have a lot of wear on, see the upper left and right on No Escape. sometimes they'd get patched with like denim pants or like old material or like whatever was at hand because they needed to show the movie more and more.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. This is the show I curated, 2020 Insight posters from the 2017 Women's March. This was a donation of posters we got from Boston. It was a huge, over 3,000 poster cache from the Women's March in 2017. And we accepted it knowing we were going to curate a show around it. Remember, collecting with the intent to exhibit? That's what happened here. So these are all homemade posters from the 2017 Women's March. We know why people were marching. It's no secret. They were taking the streets to protest a lot of things. And we had this wonderful opportunity, and I had a wonderful opportunity to curate this show. So that was that, short and sweet. The show we had up during basically COVID, and we had it up for over a year, unfortunately, was the Sleeping Giant, 100 years of posters from China. And so these are posters that span from 1920 until like 2000-ish, kind of. And they illustrate the different economic stages of China and their economy. I'm sorry, I don't have too many views of that one, but it was a great show that was on display.
Yeah.
And at the same time, downstairs we had the Swiss grid, which was late 1950s posters from Switzerland that basically introduced the idea of grid style design. So a lot of people think of Helvetica, a lot of white space. You're not wrong. Like, these posters are very evocative of that time. And a lot of people are so freaked out because they think, oh, these posters look so modern. It's like, no, late 50s, early 60s. That's when they came from. And so this is the design, the exhibition design we had going on in there. And lots of black, lots of white, lots of red. And yeah, that's pretty much all I have to share. Those are our two main exhibition spaces. So that was just kind of a quick walkthrough of older exhibitions. If you're curious about our current ones, please check our website.
Checking. And what I think is so cool, I mean, like, even just walking virtually quickly through some of the spaces, there is an accessibility to posters just because they were designed for the general public to understand something quickly. And it does put you in the time and place of when it was created and what was important. Yeah. And I think, I was never good at remembering history, but I feel like I could learn it through the posters, maybe more readily than the textbook.
Yeah, it is. They're, because they're very, as I say, generational. They're like super, interesting and fun. Mm-hmm.
Yes. And so as we, go like think toward the future here and your intentions that you're setting, for Poster House and for your career and your professional life, like, what inspires and continues to motivate you in this space?
I think it's just like, Poster House has this incredible opportunity to create poster scholarship in the United States. Like, we have this, just, as I say, opportunity to look through our past, even our personal past as the United States or globally, and sort of set the intention for posters in the future. What do we want to do? How do we want to do it? So I always feel really moved towards the educational side of things because, like, why else do we collect anything? It's to make an impression. It's to be able to curate something and have people come and learn about it because we're excited about it. So, as I move forward with my career in Poster House, I'm having another opportunity to curate. So I'll be curating a show called Behind the Scenes, which is about women in early Hollywood, like silent film directors, writers, and even actresses, and the sort of influence they had on movie making. So it, as you say, it's like, I'm not a real good student of history, but I like the idea of exploring it through posters. And one cool thing about movie posters is they have names on it, names, dates, and like half of the research is done for you. So like, you don't have to wonder where it came from or who's in the movie, So that's something I'm looking forward to. And, as I move forward, I love the educational aspect of it so much. Like I always love, that's why I do my own behind the scenes tour at Poster House too. Like it's like every 2 months or so, I do a virtual, eventually it will be in person, but for now it's virtual tour of the behind the scenes in my storage and conservation room at the museum. So I'll basically open a drawer, show you what's new, open something up, show you what arrived, show you what's cool about it, what's wrong with it, if it's like totally broken or like, needs some help. So that's, one of the things I like to do is educate people about what I do at Poster House, which is, that's a huge part of it.
Oh, that sounds so fun. I'd love to be on one of those virtual tours. Are they just listed on the website if people are curious about that?
They are, it's under events, but also if you search out our Vimeo page, because we have a Vimeo page, you can watch past ones. They're pretty fun. They're pretty fun.
That's amazing. Thank you for that pro tip. And then I think, your story is so cool and you've just been so true to like where you came from and what you're interested in. And like this role is so special. Do you have any lessons from, your path to date that you think are worth sharing? Any like tokens of wisdom?
I think, it sounds so basic, but it's really true, is what are you interested in? And just like, as I say, like I was interested in contemporary art. That led me to study art. That led me to work in a contemporary gallery because I was like, well, how do you do it? What does it do? What does that mean? How does that work? Like if you find out what you're interested in, you'll never be bored. You'll never have nothing to do. You know what I mean? Like you'll always be pursuing something. So like that's always what I've felt, gifted with, is this idea of being inquisitive and finding out how something works, or like how could I make it better, but what about that, just like always sort of questioning and moving forward. So that's something I've definitely taken away from this, because like there are certain aspects of my job, like for instance, like working on the budget, which are like super annoying and boring. But when I think about that money being turned into work that like can manifest in something else, I'm like, wait a minute, I'm interested in budgets. Like, like I'm fully on board. How do I get this happening? So like I think there's a lot to that. Like you have to be just motivate yourself, at least for a while, because like it did take me a while to like sort of crack into this career. And once I did, it was like, okay, this is a perfect fit for me, because it allows me to explore, it allows me to look around, it allows me to be inquisitive and ask these questions, and then also bring people along for the ride too, who might be curious.
I'm so happy to be brought along for the ride. I'm so happy to share your story, Melissa. This has been such a privilege, and I'm really happy to now have the Poster House as a part of my life and something I look forward to visiting
Cool.
whenever I'm home. Thank you
Please.
so much.
Yeah, my pleasure.